Hi, this is Mike Johnson presenting my college football research project for MBA 626 in Business Statistics at Walsh University. So getting into this project, so college football has had various methods for rankings and national champion selection. It was originally the AP and coaches poll, which is kind of how it was done since the beginning of college football. That evolved into the BCS system, which used various computer models as well as the coaches and AP poll to determine a national champion. And then currently is the college football playoff system. So the college football playoff has been around for 5 seasons, and a selection committee ranks the teams and ultimately chooses the final 4. And then those final 4 go through the playoffs, and the winner is the national champion. The problem with this system, the college football playoff system, is that it is unclear what criteria the committee is using to rank teams. So for this project, we'll analyze various team statistics and determine a relationship between the stats and the rankings, if there is any. So a bit of a background. Analysis of college football rankings has been going on since the mid-1970s. There were various studies done on the BCS. Meese in 2003 proposed a penalized maximum likelihood approach to create a ranking system. And in his study, the reason it was done was that the BCS polls were coming out with, at times, significantly different rankings than what the AP and the coaches poll were coming out with. So his penalized maximum likelihood method aligned more with the AP and the coaches poll, meaning that his system developed a ranking system that mimicked what the rankings were in the AP and the coaches poll. Sanders in 2011 actually found a problem in the BCS system with including the coaches polls. It was found that coaches that share a conference give their own teams between 10.61 and 27.83% more votes than they would teams outside of their conference. And it was also found that the conferences that had the automatic bids to BCS bowls seemed to band together to keep the non-automatic bid conferences out. So those coaches were voting for teams within their own, and the opposite was not seen in the non-automatic bid conferences. As far as the college football playoff system goes, since it's only been around for 5 seasons, there's not much scientific data in the literature. Most of what you see is opinion writings by various sports writers and stuff like that, such as an article from Kirk in 2018 in which he tried to summarize 14 points of what we've seen the committee do in the past 5 years. And he took those 14 and he kind of narrowed it down to 2 and said, in short, you want to face a bunch of Power 5 teams losing only once, and you want to try to win a Power 5 conference and look impressive doing it. So that's where we're at with the current systems and research that's being done. So we developed 4 hypothesis statements for this study. They all are analyzed using regression analysis, and the hypothesis statements can be seen here. So for the first one, our independent variables are wins over Power 5 teams, wins over Group of 5 teams, and wins over FCS teams. The second hypothesis is total scoring and total offense. The third is total defense. And the fourth combines all of the statistics that I looked at for this project. So those were points per game, total scoring, total offense, total defense, offensive turnovers, defensive turnovers, wins over Power 5, wins over Group of 5, and wins over FCS. That was all the quantitative data that was looked at. The dependent variables for all 4 are the rankings. And in our hypothesis statements, we're basically setting our null hypothesis is that all of the independent variables equal 0. And our alternative hypothesis is that at least one of the independent variables does not equal 0. So we're looking to see if there is a relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Methods, this is a causal study, so we're trying to see if the statistics cause the rankings. Our primary sources were the official cumulative stats taken from each team's website. Our secondary sources were the articles cited in the theoretical background section, and PHStat and Excel functions were used to calculate everything. So our findings, so for the first hypothesis, as a whole, the regression had a p-value of 0.0037. So this would show that wins do have a significant effect on the rankings. So if you look down at the individual, we can see, though, that Power 5 wins and Group of 5 wins were statistically significant, but FCS wins were not. So Power 5 win coefficient would increase your rank by 3.5 points, 3.5 steps. Group of 5, 3.3. And we'll elaborate more in further slides. So our second hypothesis had to do with offense. So we looked at total scoring and total offensive yards. This was interesting in that the regression as a whole had a p-value of 0.0052. So this would show that the combination of total scoring and total offensive yards did have an effect on the rankings. But when you look at the individual p-values for total scoring and total offensive yards, they are well above the significance value of 0.05. So this was interesting. If you looked at each of these individually, you would think that they did not have an effect on the rankings. But when you combine them together, we get the p-value for the regression of 0.0052, and shows that the offensive statistics do have an effect on the rankings. Our third hypothesis was total defense. We found a p-value of 0.4450, and so defensive statistics do not have an impact on the rankings. And then finally, we combined all of them. And this was a bit of a surprise to me, but what we found was that the p-value for the regression was 0.1307, which again is above the significance value of 0.05. So this regression, looking at all of the stats, when you combine them, does not have an effect on the rankings. And even when you look down at the individual effects, you see that the individuals none of the p-values are below the significance. The closest ones are wins. And that'll lead us to the first point in our conclusion, is that wins had the biggest effect on rankings. Offensive stats as a whole affected the rankings, but individually they were not significant. Defensive stats did not affect the rankings, and all stats combined did not have a significant effect on the rankings as well. So recommendations for teams going forward is that they should focus on winning Power 5 games, as Power 5 had a significance level below, or had a p-value below the significance level, and had the largest coefficient in terms of they would advance 3.5 spots. It would also be recommended to not schedule FCS games, as an FCS win will not benefit you at all in the rankings, and focus on offense instead of defense. As we saw, the offensive statistics, when combined, did help you in the rankings. Defensive statistics did not. Recommendations for the committee is that they should look at teams as a whole when ranking them, not just wins and offense. So what we were hoping to find was that when we combined all of these stats, we would see that we would lead to a regression and a p-value that would show that all of the stats were utilized in rankings. We didn't. So what that would indicate is that the committee is looking at certain things. In this case, we have a good amount of evidence to suggest that they're only looking at wins and offensive statistics to help create their rankings. So this could be a bias, or it could just be a trend that the committee would want to analyze going forward. And here are the references cited these are the secondary sources from the theoretical background section. Thank you.